Okay, I think we'll get going here.
A little nerving watching yourself eat.
Oh, I like the camera's over there. Perfect.
And Larry, can you put the PowerPoint up, please? Can we find out about that again? Thank you, Larry. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to kick this off, and as Mayor Pro Tem said, our typical style is a very informal conversation when we have workshops. Give a chance to council to delve into a topic a little deeper, ask the questions, and ultimately they're not providing us direction during these meetings, but giving us a sense of how we should move forward. Tonight's an exciting night. It's a night of bringing forward the start of potential opportunities and possibilities in front of us. And so what I'm going to do is I think we'll start by introducing ourselves, then I'll go through a couple slides, and then we'll hand it over to our team that's going to lead you through it. So why don't we start with Catherine?
Good evening. My name is Catherine Liu, and I'm President and CEO of the Liu Edwards Group. Our organization has a specialty in representing public agencies up and down California. It's been our honor and privilege to enact $32.5 billion with a 95% success rate. And on the sales tax side of our practice, 64 enacted sales taxes. We typically function as the city's lead consultant to help manage all the moving pieces. And I have a couple of colleagues from my team here this evening, Dave Mason, our Deputy Director, and Jennifer Longley, one of our communications specialists. And I will have Mr. Charles Hester, my friend and colleague from Godby Research, say a few words.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I'm Charles Hester. I'm Vice President of Godby Research. We are a voter opinion research and public opinion research firm based here in the Bay Area. We have had the fortunate opportunity to have worked with the city in the past in a public policy perspective. Some of you look familiar from my presentation to the council for the economic development and public safety survey that we did a couple of years ago. Aside from the city of Morgan Hill, we do revenue measure polling and community priority surveys and resident satisfaction surveys for many of your peer cities in Santa Clara County. Campbell, Cupertino, Mountain View, Palo Alto would be a couple that we've worked with recently. We've have experience in all sorts of revenue measures if the city decides to go that route. And again, we have extensive experience in doing public policy research in surveys, focus groups, all sorts of accepted quantitative and qualitative research.
Thank you. So I'm going to spend just a couple minutes here on the workshop objectives. As I said, this is an exciting time and an exciting start. So just want to talk about the things that we're planning to talk about tonight to set the path forward. First is you'll hear about different best practices. You already heard from our team here of their extensive experience in these areas. And so they'll be bringing forward many different opportunities to discuss things that have worked in the past and best practices for cities as they move forward in areas. What may be a little different about ours, but it may be unique or similar to others, is the fact that we have multiple things going on at one time. So we're really looking at that comprehensive process, as it says, and looking at three key areas. One is the update of our RDCS, or Residential Development Control System, looking at efforts to fund our existing infrastructure and improvements in that area. And then something we've been talking about more and more lately is the goal to balance the financial and environmental sustainability of our water and wastewater funds. It may seem like these are independent areas, but ultimately for our community, these are really a dependent and, in some sense, a single conversation that's going to start today and move through, potentially through November of 16. So we really want to make sure, as a team, we've focused on that already, that this is not just about a revenue measure discussion, but it's really about how these three pieces, as well as other things going on in the community, interact and interrelate with each other. We're going to talk about the global overview of looking at the ballot measure or other revenue solutions. But the key there, as it says on the bottom, is really focusing it on our deliberate community engagement. We've really changed the way we involve and work with our community the last 18 months. We believe we're going to continue down that path with this, and that the things that we are talking about and doing are really based on what our community are telling us. And so moving into this by listening to them and interacting with them. We already talked about receiving input at this stage, so tonight, if members of the community here that want to share their thoughts with us as you move down this path, obviously we'll do that, and I would maybe suggest a couple times you may want to find the right time to ask for community comment. And then getting directly to the council, this is a chance to start to answer those questions, to discuss ideas, things that you've been thinking about, and then ultimately at the end to share with us that path forward that you guys feel is appropriate to proceed as we work with the team here to my left. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Catherine to lead us through the presentation.
Great. Thank you, City Manager. Okay, I want to talk a little bit and sort of riff off what our City Manager said about the community engagement and the deliberative process. So how we approach this when we work in partnership with our cities is to understand that at this juncture, no one has decided to put anything on the ballot or what the ultimate solution will be. And so certainly because our community here in Morgan Hill is very engaged, feisty, and independent, so there's a number of different opinions that are being shared, and what we want to do is broaden the discussion and really capture some of that community flavor. So part of our deliberative process is that we advise our cities to effectively engage the public and take the time needed to build that consensus. Working backwards, should you decide to present certain proposals, either in a deliberative process for council action or as a ballot measure, those proposals should really reflect community feedback. Our successful cities typically take more than a year to develop that consensus. Designing any potential solutions with the community's priorities and perspectives in mind. Pursuant to my comments of just a moment ago, we want to break out the group of 100 that we hear robustly from, and engage other residents in our community. And as Charles Hester will describe, we will do that first through some statistical opinion research in the form of a community needs assessment, and then continue the conversation by engaging your diverse constituencies in community conversations. We also counsel our cities to consider the fact that when considering ballot measures, seemingly unrelated issues can affect the other. So that's why we're so grateful to be here with you today, understanding there are a number of major initiatives that the city is considering over the next year and a half. And though they are separate and distinct policy issues, they do affect one another. So they are both distinct parts of a package or jigsaw puzzle, but one cohesive piece. And so we do have to manage and effectively get input and consensus on all the moving parts. Obviously, it goes without saying that united counsel is essential in today's sensitive environment for any major proposals being put forward. We are in a time of very interesting political debate, and so our constituencies really do look to the team vision and the deliberateness of any given proposal put forward. Some action steps. Number one, as I've indicated, we recommend that the first step is to conduct the community needs survey to determine community perspectives. When we've analyzed that community survey and advised you of some of the key findings, we will then implement a public engagement program to engage the community around needs. So the community needs assessment will reveal areas where there is less awareness of a particular policy area or more awareness, and it'll help us to tailor the communications approach accordingly. Through that engagement process, we want to solicit input from your community, answer questions, and reflect community views in your process moving forward. So after steps 1 and 2, step 2 taking the process of several months, and I will review a timeline with you before we separate this evening. We will conduct a follow-up survey to reassess your community prior to making any final decisions about ballot measures. So, in other words, if we start the process and it appears that there is interest in particular solutions, we will move forward and get additional input, and then we will ask the community again before the council decides whether to put any proposals forward. I should add that along the way, even following placement of the any measures on the ballot, that the city has a constitutional right to convey and communicate in a factual, neutral manner, provided that you do not advocate a given position. And with the tradition of robust discussion here in Morgan Hill, we certainly look forward to working with you along the way to do that. Now, Charles Hester will talk to us more about the community needs assessment that we are recommending.
Thank you very much, Catherine. What we're looking at here is a flow chart of our typical community needs assessment surveys. We certainly don't come into a survey process with any preconceived notions or anything like that. We sort of look at our public agency partners as the subject matter experts, and we're the research experts along with the Lou Edwards Group. And what that means is we would have a rigorous process in developing any community priority survey with the council. That typically takes the form of a subcommittee to do that. But what we really want to do here is collect information from the resident population and voter population in the city to talk about things like Catherine was saying, awareness and support and quality of life and all of those things, so that that we can help to formulate a plan for moving forward. With any of our community priority survey, we always want to set the framework in the beginning of the survey that this is not about the latest flavor of Gatorade or the latest brand of Air Jordans or LeBron shoes. We want to reinforce that it's a local survey. And how we do that is we start asking questions at about the 30,000 foot level about quality of life and satisfaction with the general direction that the city is going. From there, we get into awareness and perception of the city's physical condition, perhaps awareness and perception of the city's facilities and things like that. And then we would move into a section where we want to sort of set the framework, given the development related issues and potential ballot measure, the infrastructure priorities and potential, whatever solution is going to shake out of that, and then the wastewater and water topics. So we'll go through those next, and there's no particular order here, but we will look at all of the service and facility priorities in the city, growth and development issues, and water and wastewater topics. One, because we want to gauge awareness and perception of those specific issues, but two, we want to set the framework again that this just isn't about one thing, and the city has multiple things to be considered over the next 18 to 24 month time frame, and we want people in our survey to understand that there are multiple things going on in the city. We would follow that up with a discussion of potential solutions, whether that's willingness to pay or however that might shake out, so that we can tie the potential pain of some sort of funding mechanism, whether that's internal or external, however that might shake out, with the need to, for the importance of each of these issues here in terms of growth, services and facilities, and water and wastewater. Then we move into a section where we want to talk about communications preferences and, where people get their news and who they consider to be influential stakeholders and things like that. So when the city, conducts outreach and communications, that is as most effective as possible. And finally, what we want to do at the end of the survey is we have some demographic variables and geographic variables that are included in the voter file, if we use that entirely as our universe. But we do want to collect information that's not there, one, so that we can make sure that the survey is representative of the community at large, and two, so we can look at any differences based on demographics and geography in the city for any of these issues or quality of life in general. The next is just a little bit about the process, and again, it's a very methodical, iterative process, not only between the Lou Edwards Group and Godby Research, but between Catherine and ourselves and the city. We don't just get a little bit of information from you and come back, okay, here's your survey, like it or lump it. It is a very, very thoughtful and an inclusive process, because at the end of the process, if we don't ask the right questions, or we don't ask the questions that we've gotten direction from staff staff and council, then we've sort of wasted your money in terms of conducting a survey that may not give you the information that you need. But it all starts with the kickoff meeting for the survey, where all the players are in the room. We talk about logistics, but more importantly, we talk about needs, we talk about topics and potential survey questions, so that based on that kickoff meeting, we can go back and take some of the data that you might have from polling from previous revenue measures, or if you do resident satisfaction, which sort of ties into this community priorities. So we can look at constructing a survey that's going to give you the information that is most useful to the city. There we go back and draft the survey instrument. It's sort of a behind the scenes process with Catherine until we and her team until we feel we've got a survey that's ready to present to the city, and then that gets presented to the city, and we go through that. There's probably several iterations of that to get it to where we think it's good enough to roll out to the general public and have the support of the Lou Edwards Group and the City of Morgan Hill to do so. We will develop the sampling design. That's sort of a back office thing too, but whatever universe we want to look at, if we want to look at all voters or we want to look at a hybrid of residents and voters, or whatever that might be, we sort of construct that according to the kickoff meeting and what we've agreed to there. We'll pre-test and program the survey, one, so that we make sure that we're asking the right questions, and we program the survey. It's really just in a computer. We use live interviewers for all of our surveys. We just program it so that people can get routed through the survey appropriately. We can randomize things and skip patterns and things like that. We'll field the survey, take a couple of, maybe about a week and a half. What we propose to the city is a hybrid internet and telephone survey. All the email addresses and telephone numbers come from the voter file, which we can certainly supplement with city-provided lists or a list of non-registered voters to sort of broaden our universe based on the final research objectives that are laid out in the kickoff meeting. After that comes analysis and reporting. There's a couple levels of that. There are the top lines, which are just the straight aggregate raw numbers for the survey. Those are available about 3 days or so after the survey has been fielded and been finished fielding. And then becomes our larger analysis and reporting, where we look at all the questions in the survey, and then we look at all the questions by the crosstabs, which include age, gender, ethnicity, income. So if we use the voter file, we'll look at partisanship. We'll look at geography, length of residence, and things like that to see what shakes out as statistically significant from the survey. As with all of our projects, we will make a presentation of findings to either staff or council or both, depending on the city's purview. And one of the things I think that makes at least our firm unique in this is the post-survey support that we provide to the city and to the Lou Edwards Group as needed. It's not something that we charge for, and we understand that our survey is feeding into a process that could take several months to maybe a year longer than the survey is, and we certainly want to make ourselves available to interpret the survey data as needed. These are just a few examples of how we construct our survey and potential topics of inclusion for the city. Again, it's an iterative process with the city, and we don't bring anything to the table in terms of these are going to be your questions, and that, if you don't like it, that's too bad. But for this client specifically, I want to say that this is for the city of Campbell that we're working with right now, and conducted a similar survey for them a couple of years ago. And as we can see here, you could look at police services, property values, maintaining city streets, sewers and storm drains, taxes, maintaining sidewalks, gutters, and trees, maintaining city parks and services facilities, and maintaining cultural and performing arts. This is a mean score way of looking at things so that we can sort of rank things against each other, and would be a valuable tool in the survey process for the city of Morgan Hill. This is an example of funding priorities. It's a little bit more granular than the last slide, but certainly, again, we're looking at, in this specific one, more public safety and transportation infrastructure-related stuff, so police patrols and maintaining and repairing roads and then things like that. And again, what this tells us is how popular these projects are, not only on their own, but how important these projects or popular these projects are vis-a-vis the other projects that we'll test in the actual survey.
Thank you, Charles. So just to tie a bow around that part of the discussion, because that's really step one, Do understand that, as Charles indicated, we will develop a very highly tailorized survey for your community. We currently have files on the city that track media trends, past research, and other issues going back to 1991. And one of the things that we'd like to be able to do for you is to enable the City Council to understand how attitudes have stayed the same or shifted over time, which can be very important and interesting information for a wide array of reasons. Are there any questions before we move on about the survey process itself? Yes.
I apologize for being late. I did not notice effort in terms of providing public information regarding the nature of issues prior to the survey, so that if people don't know that there's a problem, you're asking them what are you concerned with. How do you propose to deal with that or not?
Yes, thank you. I will answer, and we will review a timeline. I did set the table, I think, shortly before you entered about how the process works. But one of the things that we want to do in this baseline community needs assessment is to understand off the bat, without editing or additional information, what people's views are today. And then understanding where they have a lot of awareness, less, somewhere up the middle, allows us to tailorize our communications and engagement based on that information. And so we will do that over a period of months. And then we will do a second, shorter and more cost-efficient survey to see if attitudes have remained consistent, shifted as the result of additional engagement, gone in a different direction. And it is really very useful, even for someone like myself who does this for a living, to see the spectrum and the ebb and flow of shifts in attitudes over the course of a year. Charles, did you want to comment further?
Catherine's absolutely right. I think that the goal of this first survey is to sort of just set the landscape as opposed to, doing the education and then surveying the folks. I think that's really the goal of the second survey, so that we're potentially not biasing issues or knowledge or awareness or perception or anything like that by giving people information that they wouldn't normally come across in their day-to-day life. I think that that process is after this survey, and then we come back, like Catherine said, and would retest in the second survey sort of awareness and perception and see where those shifts are, not only among projects but among the demographics and geographical variables that I talked about before. Yeah, sure.
So if I might follow up on Gordon's question, so from the first survey, if there are issues that we have identified as a council, we'll have a better understanding of what the community's awareness of those issues are?
Absolutely, yeah, that would be the goal of the first survey. However, if council and staff feels like there may be issues that that aren't out there yet that we might want to touch on, that's an easy process to add into the survey as well. So before we start talking about the council's issues in sort of between the quality of life and the physical condition of the city, we would sort of ask folks, what is the biggest issue or biggest problem facing the city, so that we're not just coming to the table and thinking that we know exactly what the issues are. So if we need to sort of help frame the issues in the survey beyond what I've outlined in the flow chart, that can certainly be part of the survey process.
And you might still be getting there, so if I'm jumping ahead, let me know. We talked about issues within Morgan Hill. How about regional issues that affect Morgan Hill? I think we're all aware that the county and the VTA are talking about putting a transportation measure on the ballot.
Yes.
Will we include those kinds of things?
Yes, but timing is everything, because as the council is aware, who starts a foot race may not end up finishing. And so we would recommend the timing of the second survey is carefully recommended, so that to the extent that the city team is interested in placing possible measures on the ballot, what we know a year from now in terms of who's seriously
Right.
or already on the ballot will be tested at that
Okay.
time to see how our solutions match up.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Any other questions right now?
Okay, so let's talk about engagement. We, of course, want to honor the city's construct of informing, consulting, involving, collaborating, and empowering. And we will be developing our plan with those goals in mind. Our engagement components normally include, and I put this at the top because a lot of my city councils say, is direct mail even effective anymore? You know, shouldn't we just use Facebook? There's so many means of communications. Yes, interactive direct mail will continue to be one of several necessary components to a successful effort. We do emphasize the interactive nature of the communications we champion, which is right in line with the city's commitment to robust debate and conversation. So to the extent we do any direct mailings, we frequently ask for input. We invite comments. We also do so in an informational speakers bureau program that we will be designing for you after we analyze the survey results. One of the things I'm really looking forward to doing, the council does appreciate that one size does not fit all. So your neighborhoods across the city are themselves very unique. And so we will be able to determine whether there might even be geographic similarities and differences in perspectives. And we will design a proactive outreach program for you that captures those differences. Keeping local media outlets informed, using all of the city's existing social networking sites, Twitter, Facebook, including information on all city communications vehicles, including its website, and updating and engaging opinion leaders. So we frequently use the first needs assessment as a launching pad. So it's not unusual for our cities to start by saying, well, we did this initial survey where we interviewed 400 random people, and here's what they told us. What say you? And that's how we begin the conversation in some of the policy areas that your city manager has identified. Some of the examples of our engagement materials. This is a piece that we did for the city of La Mirada, and it was basically a book fold, and you can see that it's much more visual in nature than what a city typically puts out. There's not a lot of text. They opened it, there was a letter from the city manager inside, and sort of a call for ideas and input. And there was a tear-off card on this mailing that people then completed and mailed back in. We also replicated this survey on the city's social media website as speakers went out to talk to the community. Similar surveys were distributed and collected back. And in this particular community, several hundred people responded following the initial telephone, internet interviews that Godby Research did. So we're able to expand the conversation to hundreds of additional constituents through techniques like this one. Yes?
And how do you track so they're not duplicates? You know, one person fills it out 10 times.
Oh, well, it's generally entered into a database, and people, so as an example, when it's mailed out, it's one per household, and the household responds. And so we usually help our cities create a collection input tracking system. And then we, of course, report back to the council periodically on what people are saying.
So they could mail it, but then they could also do it on the internet? I mean, that would be tracked,
Yes.
so it wouldn't be duplicated?
Yes, or
Or they would do
they
it on
might,
Facebook or something?
yes, and they might receive a form during a community presentation done by the police chief on public safety issues. So we do find that the multidisciplinary nature of it does compel the broadest participation and engagement. There's only been one instance where I became aware of folks trying to front load one perspective onto our engagement process, but it wasn't. It didn't detract from the quality of the responses received.
Well, the reason I ask is we're actually conducting a survey now on some other things, and if you fill it out and then you try to fill it out again, it goes, "You already filled this out."
So we will, of
Already
course,
put something in there, so-
we will, of course, look forward to building on the excellent protocols and mechanisms that the city already has in place to prevent duplication of effort and to add value to your existing
Good.
efforts.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you.
So one of the things I want to touch on is the spectrum of communications. So we started by saying that it's important to acknowledge in this room that no one has decided to do anything yet, and that it is very important that our community not feel that way, because we don't want our effort to get input to be viewed as disingenuous. These responses and these inputs should help to frame the development of any proposal put forward. So we usually have a process where we go out, ask for input, and then we report back to residents on what their neighbors say. So it's usually the next step in the process. And then should the city council decide to move forward with putting ballot measures on for consideration, you'll notice on the right-hand side of this slide that there's actually mailed information, in this case, for the city of Campbell, which also includes citation of the measure letter and information about the measure itself in a neutral, impartial manner. And we collaborate very closely with your city attorney to make certain that her office is also independently reviewing any and all materials along the way to ensure that they are factual and impartial in nature. And then just jumping on, of course, the City of Morgan Hill is doing a great job already. We will be working with your team to keep the media informed, to embed information on your city websites, to suggest additional Facebook engagement and information. YouTube, we do find that constituents enjoy watching news clips that we develop in partnership with Public Works that show the potholes and before and after shots and other things. Obviously, utilizing other mechanisms such as Nextdoor, Twitter, all of these things will be part of our program. As I was mentioning, and as your city attorney will no doubt advise you as we go along the way, I've already said that city-issued information cannot advocate any partisan positions. And along the way, particularly for any post-placement communications, it is evaluated within the context of its style, tenor, and timing. But cities do have a right to speech within these parameters, and we look forward to working with all members of your executive team on these issues. Our recommended timeline. So we are in summer of 2015. We would like to begin the process, as I mentioned, by developing community survey number 1, doing the interviews, analyzing the results, reporting back to city staff and the council on that initial community feedback. And then in September, we'd want to develop our community engagement plan, informational messages, engagement tools. In fall and winter of this year, the balance of this calendar year, we would launch our community engagement conversations, including our interactive mechanisms, and assess those reactions, make adjustments to our plan as needed for 2016. Beginning in January through the spring of 2016 would involve more of the same. But as we get towards late spring, right around May is when we would conduct that second community survey. Specifically, that survey would include, the first is really a community needs assessment, figure out where people are and how best to capture their input. That May survey is really a time to assess ballot measure viability, if ballot measures are solutions that the council and the community are interested in. If those ballot measures appear feasible, we would take the June and July months to finalize the voter handbook materials and have the city council take action as appropriate and submit those materials to the county elections office. Many of my cities still erroneously believe that they must step away from the process following submission of the materials to the county elections office, but that in fact is not so. Our successful cities do continue their legally permissible engagement efforts following placement all the way up until Election Day. So with that, what questions or discussion would you like to have?
Council? Questions, Gordon?
How many of your clients have, excuse me, set up a separately funded issues committee, and how would you work, if at all, with that committee?
None of my public agency clients have set up such committees, as those committees must be outside the control and authority of a public agency. It is frequently the case that community boosters and volunteers of their own accord may form such committees and do advocacy for or against a measure. With respect to our office's protocols, if we are representing a public agency through Election Day, we generally do not represent other parties at the same time, so that we might focus solely on the city's informational effort.
The kinds of things that we've been talking about so far that you've already done a little bit of research on, are these the kinds of things that communities are talking about in California? I guess my question is, how unique are we, or are communities throughout the state having the same kinds of discussions we're having tonight?
Yes, many California cities are grappling with the types of issues that the city of Morgan Hill is. Naturally, our communities run the gamut in terms of community engagement and activism. We are so excited and looking forward to this collaboration because we understand, value, and appreciate the strong civic pride and activism which exists in the city of Morgan Hill. But our agencies are grappling with very significant long-term financial stability and infrastructure needs. Mm-hmm. Particularly with regard to capital infrastructure, funds simply do not exist to make a dent in the magnitude of the problem for many of the cities. Also, as we look towards hopefully more stable economic times, we're just coming out and still recovering from a very tough time. So one of the things I find very interesting is that constituents are now beginning to say more that long-term financial stability is something that they value in their city. This is something fairly new that I've seen in the last 6 or 7 years particularly. Mm-hmm. In the earlier, many years before that, it was more service-oriented. When I call 911, I want someone there. Right. I want my parks maintained. But we're seeing more and more a recognition and concern that their local city be able to be financially sustainable. The final thing that I will say is there's definitely been a trend away from special purpose measures, which require a 2/3 vote, mm-hmm. but limit your use of the funds to a single purpose. And the trend has been more towards general purpose measures, which provide the greatest flexibility to address a wide array of quality of life issues from your public. And we're seeing more of a trend in other cities that constituents really want their public safety and their parks and the potholes maintained, that they recognize that it's a wonderful patchwork quilt of services that really make a quality of life worthwhile.
Thank you. Any other questions? Perhaps now would be a good time to ask for public comment. So if you don't mind, if there's anyone in the public that'd like to just come on forward and introduce yourselves and have your say.
Just a quick question. Rocky Garcia, I've been a home builder developer in town for 50 years. It's always been, don't tax me, don't tax thee, tax the person behind the tree. I'm usually the one that represents that man behind the tree. Resident moving into town. Must be a formula as we understand nexus, which means being able to provide, the new homeowner has to provide his fair share. Sometimes in our case, better. What's the magic number? What's the magic number that can be assessed that you see? What I'm saying, dollar-wise? Because it's going to go up or down.
Well, of course, and not to be coy, but to very directly answer your question, I don't want to speculate because it does depend on the funding mechanism in question, whether it's a parcel tax, UUT, sales tax, some type of CFD mechanism, a Prop 218 model. But I will say that in all of the communities that we're working in, there is at this time less interest in singling out a sole constituency and much greater interest in having everybody pay their fair share. And that everybody also includes out-of-town visitors who come to enjoy the many amenities that the city of Morgan Hill provides in your charming downtown. They are also included within everyone needs to pay their fair share. I think one of the things that the Great Recession did, in my observation, is people began to pull together more. They recognize that it is critical to have strong economic policies that generate the revenue that allow our cities and communities to be sustainable. So my straight up answer to you is, I won't give you a canned answer, but I will say for our city council and any members of the listening public, the way that we will craft these community needs assessments will be completely fair and impartial. No one constituency will be singled out for bouquets or black eyes. Our only interest is to provide comprehensive information for the city council to make informed decisions moving forward. And we will see what the people say.
And if I may, it's really important for us as home builders, our group as home builders, that issue passes, because I think that I'm worried that if people vote no, they'll continue to vote no.
Thank you. We are finding a greater partnership among a wide array of constituencies that include residents, business, service providers, seniors, and that is why it's so very important that as we launch this effort, there is no perception whatsoever that any of us are attempting to Bigfoot the community with any given solution, but that through their voices and their engagement, their questions and their input, that we develop solutions and proposals that are responsive and empowering to that input. Okay. And so theoretically, so stated very candidly, if we feel that any given proposal is polarizing and likely to be ineffective, we will so advise your city manager and the city council and counsel the city to look to a solution that enjoys more broad-based consensus.
Any other public comments? Okay, seeing none. Yeah, Gordon.
Question, which you just alluded to in answering Mr. Garcia's question. How do you poll amongst the variety of funding mechanisms, you know, a bond issue where they, you know, you spend it over 20 years in your property tax to fix some capital that lasts 20 years versus, you know, a sales tax that, you know, paid for partially by people who come to visit the city?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. One of the things that we look forward to learning more about is not just the anecdotal sense of the profound needs that the city has, but the associated dollar amounts. And because of our significant legacy of work in the state, there are a number of different mechanisms that can generate enough or less so revenue to cover those projects. We certainly, so it's a delicate balancing act between developing a very comprehensive survey document, but also not diluting it. So we generally counsel our cities to look at testing two of the most fruitful funding mechanisms to evaluate whether there is community interest in either.
I'll just add just a little bit of that. When we're testing the survey and we're testing the different issues and the different projects that the city's considering, you know, that will tie into or help tie into the dollar amount, and that, you know, a lot of times will tie into whatever funding mechanism that might be. You know, if it's millions of dollars over many years, then, you know, that's a lot different than several $100,000 a year. We'll also look, like Catherine said, at a couple of different funding mechanisms within the survey process for the community priority survey, so that again, we're tying sort of willingness to pay with the issues, you know, that we're talking about here. Because if we just ask about the issues, everything's going to be important if we don't, you know, tie you know, that there is I don't want to say pain, but, you know, there is, you know, there needs to be some investment to get the return on that investment.
Other questions? Okay. Do you have more on the formal part of your presentation? Okay. So I do have a question. I was looking ahead on your PowerPoint. You have some just information about demographics and voters in Morgan Hill. Your first slide, you show that one right there. Back up one. The permanent absentees, is that of the 20,000 voters registered?
Correct.
Wow. It's getting bigger.
So, it's obviously a very robust percentage, and that does tell me a couple of things. So going back to, I do feel that your constituencies are residents and stakeholders that appreciate and value receiving information and making informed decisions. We understand that in terms of civic participation in the ballot process, that as a general trend, more people are opting to vote by mail. But this is a significant percentage in your community. And so one of the things that tells me is, let's make sure that we are robust in how we engage our public and share information for the coming year and a half.
Right. You have to get to them early. And then the prediction, or as many as 16,500 could participate in next year's presidential election. Is that just based on the trend of voting in Morgan Hill, particularly during presidential years?
Yes, I have taken a peek at your demographics for the last many years.
Probably more importantly than just the past last cycle there was an incumbent Democrat, so,
Yeah.
Way down, for the Democrats. This will probably.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a great number. Obviously, we'd always like to see more voter participation, but that's a really good number.
20%.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Anyone else cheat and look ahead?
Don't cheat.
Attaboy. Okay. If your formal part is done, I'm going to send it back to the city manager and see what kind of.
So just a few things, just as you remember the second slide ended, the last bullet said, are we heading down the right path? And I'm sensing from the council, I think from the questions you've asked, from listening to you, that you would concur we're heading down the path that we should head down. But I just want to make sure that the council as a whole agrees with that, because some of our next steps depend on us really starting to move forward as outlined by our colleagues here in regards to formalizing this and then just starting down the path with the survey work and starting with the engagement plan. So like we started this, we said it's an exciting time. We really do think it is. So far in working with everyone here, they really understand Morgan Hill. But what's even more impressive is they said they want to learn what Morgan Hill has to say. And so that's going to be key in this process. And I know along the way, we're going to be in almost constant contact. And I believe we're going to have frequent updates and communication with the council throughout this. This will not be, you'll see these guys today and you're not going to see them for another 18 months. This is going to be something that the council really gets involved with, so that as we take each step, you're understanding where we're proposing to go, and at the same time you're saying that's the right step to take. So backing up to why I asked, are we heading down the right path? It's important that as we set the course today, there'll be course corrections, as we know, as we'll learn, but ultimately we're looking at something that really leads us through some of these key measures, not necessarily revenue measures, but measures as we move forward. As we really start to embark on things like the water and wastewater rate study. Andrew and everyone, as you know, and some of the colleagues here are dealing with the RDCS update. And so all this will start to get incorporated, and we will be expanding the team here that's involved from the management side of the team. But back to the point with the council, we do believe it's important. That's why we appreciate having the workshop, that you're really here at the table understanding where we're heading each step of the way. So with that, is there any other closing comments anyone has or questions from the council?
We're eager to get started.
Excellent. Yeah. Yes. So Steve, if I might follow up on what you just had to say. So I obviously think it's a great idea to have frequent updates with the council. And I guess I would recommend that not just at times where you need a decision to be made, but just when we haven't talked in a while about it, we need to be updated on things. There's new information or perhaps no information, just so that it feels like it's constantly in front of us, so that the public knows that this is really being driven by the council, by their elected officials. Well, if there's no other comments, questions, I think we'll adjourn this workshop and we'll come back to order at 7 o'clock. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me open up for public comment. I see Mr. Muirhead wants to give us a bit of public comment.
I'm Doug Muirhead. I've lived in Morgan Hill for about 10 years. I wanted to make a comment. I'm not trying to insult anyone here, but my memory of the last time we tried to do a tax measure is a little different than the officials have described it. Within my hearing, I've always been told that the residents weren't willing to support a tax the last time around. Remember the community at that time, I think there was a certain amount of distrust on the part of some of our residents about whether the money would be spent on things we want it to be spent. This comes back. And so I was thinking about the comments that were made this morning in the RDCS workshop. We had a lot of people just throwing numbers around, 2% growth and 230 allocation units. And only a couple of people tried to put that into terms I think ordinary residents could understand. Constantine said, if you want to preserve open space and ag lands, you can't build on it. And Councilmember Lieber said, you know, when we grow, what does that mean to our infrastructure? An example would be, does Chief Swing go out and hire new officers, or does the patrol area expand? And so I would encourage you to try and provide some sense to people what this means to them, not 55% want cleaner parks or something like that. A great visual, I don't remember, maybe it was the mayor. Somebody was fishing in a water-filled pothole. Strike a memory. So I would just, encourage you to look at ways so that our residents feel they know what they're getting and difference to them in their lives. I mean, all for improved infrastructure, especially if it, but you know, let's just be technical, I guess.
Thank you. Thanks very
Can I
much.
say anything to what he said?
You bet. Go for it.
I never know. Well, I appreciate his comments. That election was 6 years ago when I was running for election for the first time, and there was concern amongst the public because we were asking for general fund money that it wouldn't go for police, which they were kind of selling it as. And I think that's what he's referring to, is there was this distrust in the community of how the money was going to be spent if they passed this bill or this tax increase. So just a little background for you. Yeah. So I think it's very important how we craft this when we put it on the ballot and how we make it our citizens comfortable with this, how we're going to use it. So what Mr. Muir had said is really very spot on, that we have to be careful of how we craft it. So, I mean, you were on council then, so, I mean, do you have any comments about that? I mean, I was just running for election at that time. But do you feel the public kind of had those concerns?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, good, okay. Because I was still trying to get in, but I was hearing stuff.
Yeah.
So you were in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was my takeaway from that 6 years ago in the election.
I think the public has a concern no matter whenever it comes to being taxed and what the money's going to be spent on. So I think that any initiative that we put on the ballot have some kind of not a benchmark, but a way that the public knows where the money's going to be spent and how. Reassurance, but also there has to be something built into it. I know that when I vote to have a tax raised, I want to know that the money's going to be spent for that specific item, not just being thrown into the general fund.
Right.
So that is, I think, something that's very important to Mr. Muir's point, that perhaps, and I've heard different ways of putting things on the ballot, an A-B ballot where Measure A passes and B passes. It has to, it's like a safeguard. And I don't know anything about that. That's for you guys to tell us about. But just something that gives the voters assurance that the money's going to be spent for what we say it's going to be spent for, or what they want it to be spent for. And that's what the surveys are going to show.
Gordon.
Maybe they could speak to that. I've done both the general with a council adopted resolution saying we're going to spend it this way, but it's only a council resolution, versus a specific tax. They had some factual information in terms of percentage passing, but I wonder if they'd want to share their thoughts on that.
Catherine?
Given that we have somewhat of a skeptical community.
Yes, and I'm not sure I would characterize it as a skeptical community, but a very active and engaged one. And for that reason, again, I do want to emphasize, and maybe I will say it this way, we might be in a position of coming to you fairly soon and saying, no one in town is interested in any type of measure. which if that's how they feel, that would be how they feel. I think that one of the things that we have to be very careful about is, yes, all of these are very critical and important issues to begin putting more meat on the bones on as we get later in the process. So before we get into any of this, we have to first determine whether there's even a remote interest, given the current debate that already exists in the community about whether the city will be acting to tax its constituents. As an outside observer to the city, and I certainly don't sit in any of your seats, but if someone were to ask me, what were you doing at the Morgan Hill City Council workshop this evening? I would certainly not presume to suggest that we were here to necessarily talk about tax measures as a sole solution. But should the community itself be interested in considering a local funding measure, we would evaluate a 2/3 versus general purpose. We would evaluate trust and job performance. These are all areas that we should embrace in terms of wanting the knowledge and to understand where constituent perspectives are at the beginning of the process allows us to have relaxed conversation and, yes, even debate over the course of many months. And that is the only way that we can really change hearts and minds, when we are going through that iterative process with the community ourselves. So, yes, there are many mechanisms that we will consider at the right time with the benefit of a year of community debate and discussion. So, that is my response.
Okay. One of the great things about chairing the meeting is I get to speak last if I want to, and then adjourn real quick. So no. I just wanted to comment real quick, and the city manager talked about it early on. Catherine, you talked about it as well. What always gets sort of the play out of a discussion like this is, are they going to tax us or not? But we need to keep in mind that the conversation we want to have with our community, and we need you to help us to really get deeper into the community than we can on our own, is more about what kind of Morgan Hill do we want? There are lots of things that we need to talk to our voters about that don't involve taxes, that don't involve a new local funding measure. We certainly have very big issues that we do need to talk about funding for and what the expectations of our community are. But there are plenty of other things as well, and we've embarked on this process to update our RDCS, and we know that that end result would require us to ask the voters to approve whatever we come up with. So I view this process as much broader and much more than just a tax discussion, but about where do we want Morgan Hill to go. I think we're at that place where we're right at the edge of taking Morgan Hill to a new level, and what comfort level do our citizens have with that, and how much are they willing to be engaged in that, and what are they willing to put into that happening. And so I think that that's really what I hope we all sort of keep our focus on over the next year through that conversation. It's too easy to get distracted by a tax question and that kind of a discussion. And with that, we're adjourned. So I just wanted to put those comments out there. And Steve, did you have anything else to close with? No? Then we will adjourn and be back at 7 o'clock.
Cool.
Thank you, everyone.